In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Jim Packer, president of worldwide television and digital distribution at Lionsgate, and one of Hollywood's most seasoned dealmakers. Jim's career began with a hand-delivered resume and a fake delivery job, but it quickly grew into decades at the forefront of media's biggest shifts, from the rise of cable in the syndication era to the streaming revolution and now the dawn of AI-enhanced entertainment. Dan and Jim dive into the art of building and monetizing a content library, the evolution of storytelling across formats and franchises, and the role that AI and predictive analytics are playing in how studios find, fund, and future-proof great content. They also explore what the arrival of the Sundance Film Festival means for Colorado's creative economy, and why Jim's side passion for producing documentaries keeps him grounded in the power of storytelling. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Well, Jim, thank you for being on the podcast here. This is going to be a fun journey.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons I'm really enjoying this is Colorado has the opportunity to take a journey that is much more around creative tech, kind of a creative set of businesses. The Sundance Film Festival is a huge step toward that direction, but there's already several creative businesses around Colorado that have been percolating. So you come from the creative world, you split time between LA and Boulder. So I think featuring you and letting those in the Colorado community know what a talent we have right in our backyard here is a big deal. So thanks for letting us feature you on this.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Great. So you've done a lot of stuff in your career, mostly at just a couple or three companies. So
three.
You've been long-term at multiple companies, and we'll explore those. But before we explore those, what stands out the most for you? What has been most fulfilling to you in your career journey?
I would say lately, over the last probably 10 years, it's really watching my team grow. You know, we have a very dynamic industry that's changing the same way that your industry has changed many, many times over the years. And with change, you have to have a team that's very comfortable with adapting and really learning and growing. And I've seen that with so many of my team members. And when people leave and they go off to bigger jobs, I love it. And I save all the cards that I get from people about the journey they had at our department, at our group. And that's probably the most enjoyable for me now, is really kind of watching that growth. And it's happening at a time when the business is going through a big transformation. I mean, so it's kind of interesting to watch this transformation and watch the team, how they address change, because, how many people go to movies is changing. How you're watching and consuming content is changing. You know, YouTube, I was reading some stats recently, it's just flipped. 50% of their viewing now occurs on connected TVs. So it's no longer just a mobile experience. It's really flipped to the home. And so YouTube.
And you're talking about YouTube itself, not YouTube TV.
I'm talking about YouTube itself.
Yeah.
And so as a platform, that platform in the last 10 years has gone from, we looked at it as, we did business on it. We do a decent chunk of business with them, but it's primarily user-generated and creator-generated. And the creators, I think, have really done an amazing job of making that platform become even more important. You look at shows like Mr. Beast that just transitioned to Amazon. It's not just a show transitioning. He's got a huge business now that he started on YouTube. So it's kind of fun to watch that.
Well, let's talk about the creators. You mentioned how video and entertainment is consumed, and we'll get there, but let's talk about how it's produced. Maybe using that as an example, maybe bringing AI into the discussion, bringing social media into discussion, the producing of content, the creation of content, which you've been a creator of content as well.
Yes.
How is the creation of content evolving? What scares the industry the most? I know AI is something they see as a big change and scares a lot of folks, but probably creates enormous opportunity as well. How do you see the evolution going forward? But maybe bring us up to speed now. Look at what creation was 10, 15 years ago, and how did that change getting to us to today? Because there's been massive change over that time frame. And then look forward in time.
Well, I would say that in general, you still have to have a great story. And I always ask, do we need this movie or do we need this TV show? I always ask myself that when I'm analyzing what projects we're bringing to market, because you really need to make sure the world needs it, and I think that that's something that we've done a great job of launching a lot of original IP. When we've done offshoots of our IP that's been successful, it's always been something that's compelling and interesting. I think you'll see one this summer with Ballerina, which is Ana de Armas in the John Wick world. And she's going to be, kind of taking that journey. And I think we heard from the fans and Adam Fogelson, who runs our motion picture group, there is a real heightened interest in the world of John Wick, because it's always been kind of secretive if you watch the movies, and where he came from and what's the high table and all those types of things. And so that's an exploration that the world, I do believe, needs and they want. You'll see that with our movie this summer. I think.
And Ballerina is an offshoot of that? Or?
Ballerina is an offshoot of the John Wick world. Okay. She is a assassin, and you'll see John Wick in it.
Okay.
So he's actually in the movie. And we've kind of teased that out a little bit. So now everybody knows he's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think overall there's, quality and how you reach your audience and how you get your audience is more involved now than it's ever been. And partly due to the fact that I forget what the numbers are, but there was like a spike during COVID that was probably, call it 500 to 600 TV shows were being made a year. Now that's down to 300 to 400. So there's less content being made, which means the content that is being made has to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to.
Well, when you say there's less content being made,
as far as television, that's TV shows.
TV shows, because
TV
content being made in general is
more,
probably exploding.
But I'm saying
the
stuff that I have done in my career, which is really the studio level kind of film and TV.
Mm-hmm.
TV shows, there's less being made, so they have to really stand out. Films, you really have to make sure it's a film people want to go pay money to go to the theater with, and I think that's one of the changes we've seen that is, I would say, a challenge for us is some of the movies that have come out. If somebody doesn't want to see a movie or the reviews are bad on a Thursday or Friday, they just don't go to the movie. That we used to have the ability to, even if a movie wasn't, maybe going to be a blockbuster, you're still going to make 20, 30, 40 million dollars. Those mid-level movies, people used to call them programmers, things like that. Those movies are harder to find now. They're harder to get because the amount of home viewing you can do as a consumer has gone up tremendously. I mean, you just look at everything with Netflix and all the Amazon, all the various streamers have tons of quality content. And then going back to YouTube, the creator community, the amount of hours being consumed, I think YouTube's either number one or number two. That platform alone takes up some of our kind of collective eyeball time. And so you really have to make sure content is created now efficiently. So that's the other thing that we're doing. You really need to make sure that the cost is reasonable. You can't be wasting production money in today's world. Everybody's trying to be profitable. Everybody needs to have a story. There was a period of time where it was all about subscriber growth, and people maybe weren't focusing as much on profitability. That's changed. People are all focused on profitability now. So getting really great television shows or great films produced efficiently is kind of where we're going.
We just invested in a company, a LA-based company called Nocto. In fact, it has roots to CU, which we'll talk about that as well. Most of our investing is done in Colorado, but this one had kind of a Colorado tie-in, but it's based in LA, and it's about bringing sound editing to the next level using AI so that you can take a video and run it through a sound editor. It will watch the video. It will tee up precisely when each sound needs to be inserted, pull from a library after getting some input from the designer as to what they're looking to create, what type of mood, what type of ambiance, tag the timing of it, and then the designer has a starting point where the sound has been inserted, and then they can review it and decide what they like, what they don't like, how to play around with it. But the promise of it is you end up with a higher quality outcome, but with far less time to get there, bringing efficiency to the production of a video.
Right. Which I think, AI in helping with efficiency, timing, costs, things like that. We have a partnership with Runway. There are going to be lots of those applications. I'm doing it right now as an example, and I'm doing it in ways that my team just couldn't do on their own. So it's not really it's doing nothing more than supplementing my team. It's not replacing my team. So as an example, we publish movies on AVOD platforms where basically we get paid when people watch our movies, sell advertising against it. And we publish about 1,000 pieces of content a month. And what we publish, when you're going through 5,000 movies, 4,000 or 5,000 movies and 10 to 20,000 hours of TV shows, that's a daunting task to pick the key ones. And so what we've now done is we now have a couple of platforms that we use that help us surface up things that we may not know and gives us recommendations. And so what we found, and it's interesting because initially I thought it was going to help us pick the best titles in a given month so that when we published, we would make the most money because AI would be assisting us. What I found was the real benefit is in the middle and the bottom. It's not the top. It's the middle and the bottom of the selections.
Top's pretty obvious.
And the team, my physical team and my people team, they have more time now. They don't have to go through the middle and the bottom. So they have time to think about what to do in the top. And we run very lean as an organization.
So take us through this. How would you use AI to do that?
It would go through 4,000 movies and it would take the data if you're going to.
And when you say 4,000 movies,
it's everything we own and we control.
Everything you own and control.
Between 4,000 and 5,000 movies.
That have been produced over what time frame?
Probably 30 years.
Over 30 years.
Yeah, most of it 30 years. So it goes through those 4,000 to 5,000 films, whatever ones are available. It looks at if you're on Roku or Pluto or one of the various AVOD platforms, Samsung. It'll look through your last 3 years of performance data. So everything that's gone on with every single movie, and it will take that and create a model. And then it will look at your 4,000 to 5,000 titles and it will start to do a predictive output that our team can then look at. And so when we pick our, call it 1,000 movies, we'll let AI pick movie 500 down to 1,000. Because every little 5, 10, 15% bump on a movie that's 772 out of 1,000, you add that up against 500 movies, it's going to be a big number. So that helps us. And then the team has time to spend a half a day looking through what's the zeitgeist going on? What kind of things can we find that might be interesting? And then they can pick movies that are going to be more attuned to be in the top 100.
Yep. And probably building upon the intelligence that comes from AI. In fact, let's put a little placeholder there and come right back to this. But now I want to know more about you.
Okay.
And kind of the platform you're currently part of, Lionsgate, as well as what got you to where you are today. So let's bring you into the picture for the audience. And let's start with you graduating from CU and somehow ending up with Disney. So
I graduated CU, but I had a journey similar to yours. I got turned down by CU. Not many people know that. I applied. I wanted to get into the business school. I'm a big outdoorsman and I love this campus. I actually never visited. I just literally looked at it. Back then it was brochures.
Yep.
And I
like the way you're looking over your shoulder because
I see the Flatirons.
It's right there. Yeah.
It's right there. And so that's what kind of drew me here. But I didn't get in. Yeah. And that was probably my first kind of wake up call that I thought for sure I would get in. And I thought I had the grades and, we didn't have technology to really, maybe overserve our information overload. I just knew I got a rejection. So I ended up going to Oregon and getting my grades up and ultimately knew that I couldn't get into business school at that point because my grades were up enough. I knew I could get into CU. So I went into arts and sciences. And so I went into arts and sciences and actually took a film class. I'll never forget, it was in a terrible classroom, with leaky things. And it might have even been with the lead guy, Stan Bragg, the professor that's known there. And I remember watching.
Well, tell us about that professor.
I don't remember exactly who it was, but he was very well known at the film school. And I remember watching things like Citizen Kane and movies that really, I was interested in entertainment, But I did enjoy that film class. It really fascinated me.
Why was CU big in film?
No,
back
it was
then?
not big. It just they had a film program. They still have a film program. It's bifurcated a little bit now between colleges, but they still have a film program. And it's kind of where I started to really fall in love with movies at that point. But I just knew I was going to be better situated in the business side. So I transferred into Leeds and ultimately graduated and, really enjoyed my time here tremendously. And I've been a loyal and giving back alumni my whole life. And I truly enjoyed it. And you'd be surprised. The interesting thing is there's an entertainment group that's getting together over the course, I think actually this week maybe. You'd be amazed how many people graduated from CU and went on to entertainment.
Really?
Big time entertainment.
Yeah.
Because it's not a big film and TV program like you have at USC or UCLA, which is under one umbrella, but everybody's resourceful. There's entrepreneurial people like entertainment. There's also a very big out-of-state contingent of students here. So it's not just Colorado. It's a fairly diverse from where people come from. But it's amazing when I looked at the roster of where people have gone into the entertainment space, much bigger than you'd ever think. And I knew when I graduated that I wanted to get into entertainment. And I ultimately wanted to get into something with sales and marketing. I graduated with a marketing degree. I did something you can't do anymore, which is the way a fun little story on how I got my resume out. I had a resume, a little cover letter that I would write to Dan Caruso, who was at the Walt Disney Studios. I'd put my resume in there, and then I would have some references, and I'd put them in an envelope, and the envelope would say, deliver by hand. And I'd get my mom to write in cursive, very beautiful writing, personal and confidential. And that way, when I delivered the letters, and I was the delivery person, so I would drive up in my little Honda, I'd go to the studios, I have a delivery for Mr. Caruso. Go right in. This is before security. Oh, yeah, go right in. I'd walk right up, put it there, leave. And in my letter, I'd say, I will call you tomorrow at noon, and I really hope to get a meeting. Just very simple. And I knew every single time they were going to open that envelope. Because what assistant's going to open a personal and confidential thing that's hand-delivered? You just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting lots of interviews that way, and I got one with a guy by the name of Rich Goldman, who was at the Walt Disney Company. Yeah. And they were starting a new syndication division, which was, at the time, syndication was when you went city by city to sell your television show or your movies. And the Walt Disney Company.
So set the stage of what TV was back then, and how TV content was consumed back then.
Back then,
very different than today.
Very different. So
this is
today.
what time frame is this?
This is in the late 80s. So in the late 80s, the local television station ecosystem was very, very strong, and they all had network affiliates. So, and they had some independents, like the Fox affiliates were big affiliates at that point. And the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, the four big ones, and then you had a lot of independent stations. They would deliver their programming via satellite to every single market, and every DMA, like Denver, had a particular region, and they would buy content for the time periods that was not filled by the network. So anything that wasn't filled by local news or their network affiliation, they'd have to buy from a studio or buy from an independent company. Mm-hmm. So it was a very robust market at that point, really, really robust. It was back in the days when television sitcoms, I sold Home Improvement, but you had the Cosby Show, you had, things like Roseanne, very big shows. Those shows would come out and they would sell for anywhere from $1 billion to $2 billion. It was a huge business, and it was all done on a market by market basis.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Huge business. And so at the time, cable was growing, but not huge. I mean, it was definitely growing. And so the cable ecosystem existed. There were no streamers, not a streamer around. Yeah. Couldn't buy a movie, couldn't rent a movie. It was nothing like that. You wanted to watch TV, you either had rabbit ears, or you had cable, or you had satellite, and you were able to watch your ecosystem. And that's
Blockbuster must have been a thing then.
Blockbuster was huge back then. Yeah. It was, I still have my card from years ago. I save it for just a little bit of
really?
a little bit of posterity. I still have that original card because I used to have one right near our house. And it was a great training ground for me. So I basically got hired as a trainee, and I was in Los Angeles, and they hired me, and I'll never forget the phone call. They said, look, do you want to go to New York and start work? And I said, never been, but yes, I'll start on Monday. I'll be there Monday. And they said, great. And so they gave me an extra week to get my act together. And I lived on a friend of mine's couch, and I started my job as a trainee at the Walt Disney Company. And I think the list of, you got markets at that point, and I was a trainee, so I got the worst markets. And I don't want to say this was a bad city, but it was a tough city. I'll say it that way. My top
Very politically correct.
Yes, it was a tough city. My best market, my top market was Wheeling, Steubenville, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Wheeling,
Hotbed
West Virginia. It was a hotbed for TV. And they only had 2 TV stations. And so the way that you were able to really do well in the business, if you had a market like Phoenix, which had 10 to 15 TV stations, you always had a bidding war. So it didn't matter what you brought in, if you bought movies or TV shows, whatever you brought in, you had bidders. Wheeling, Steubenville, not so much. 2 stations, didn't buy anything. So that's where I started. And we were at the time, the Walt Disney Company, you may remember this well, but it was a TV show that was on Sunday nights called The Wonderful World of Disney.
Oh, yes.
It was a Sunday night show.
It was huge.
And the way that the Walt Disney Company at that point, and this kind of shows you the value of content and why I still love the business and I love the kind of the importance of content. When Walt Disney would make a show for ABC in that particular thing, he'd do it and then he'd put it in the vault. When he'd make a movie, he'd put it in the theaters, put it in the vault. When Michael Eisner came in, he came in and took over the Walt Disney Company. The first thing they did was put together a syndication group and said, what can you do with these movies? And we would take these movies and put them in packages of 25 movies. They were literally sitting there generating nothing, zero. And we would all run around to there were 200 markets in the country. And we would go out and license 25 movies in each city. And that ended up being $100 to $150 million business every time we did it. And then when we took The Wonderful World of Disney out, same thing. All of a sudden, you had this library. And if you look back in the early days of the Walt Disney Company, when they did this, their stock just took a tear all the way up.
I read the book Disney War.
Which happened.
I still have a copy of that from when I read it years and years ago.
Yeah. And that was like a little bit, fascinating story as they got up there and really in the Michael Eisner, Ovitz world and that whole dynamic. But ultimately, I just did that and I moved around every time there was an opportunity. I didn't care where it was. I moved to Chicago to work in Chicago, and that's actually where I met my wife there. And I ended up doing that. And the thing I didn't know at the time, Dan, is by moving, and I covered every region in the country. So I had to go into local TV stations in like New Orleans and Texas and California and the South and the Midwest. And I learned about people and their style. You know what I mean? The styles of the various regions of our country. The Midwestern stations, they never made a decision quickly. They just didn't. They just waited and they took their time.
Maybe that's why I moved out of the Midwest.
Yeah, they just would like I'd say, the fall season would start in September and I was selling at the time a talk show, Regis and Kathy Lee, whatever the show was. At the time, I'm dating myself now. It's not called that, but it was called at the time, Regis and Kathy Lee. And they would say, well, we'll make a decision Labor Day. I said, but it's going to start in 2 weeks. We like to take our time. And when I was calling on the Southwest, they'd make that decision a year in advance. And I want to buy it for 2 years, by the way, or 3 years. So it was just a different thing because of the regions and the sensibility of the people running those local stations in those countries, or not in the country since I do world now, but those cities. And what's interesting is that helped me because I had to learn all the different skill sets of how to deal with different types of people. I say to my team now, it's a little bit like Spinal Tap, the old movie from 1 to 11. And like, I want to take it up to 14 or whatever the number is. You need to understand when it comes to, I think in today's world, when you're selling, sometimes selling is not selling. Sometimes it's being low key and letting the buyer just decide at the right time. Sometimes you do need to turn it up a notch if you're competing in a situation where you need to be a little more aggressive. But having the ability to have that range is even more important today than it was back then. I learned the range just by cities. And
I did. In not to turn this into a political conversation, but you do see a lot of the political fray that's going on right now is different regions, think differently. They behave differently. They express their values differently. It doesn't necessarily mean their values are widely different, but they express them differently. And there's so much talking past each other. I mean, if you're kind of come at it from a Texas point of view and you're trying to talk to someone from Chicago or someone from the East Coast, you're just talking past each other and get so emotional so quick. But in your case, it sounds like you had the opportunity to get to know how the different cultures kind of behaved, reacted, and then how to kind of align with their cadence as opposed to always have the same approach.
Yeah, you had to. And I did a lot of trial and error where I might be a little too aggressive when I would go into the Midwest, and I'd realize, well, they just didn't buy from me because they didn't want to. And I realized sometimes they would buy from you just because they liked you. So if everything was equal, you really had to just respect if they said, we're not going to make a decision until 1 week before the thing goes on the air. Okay, I'll call you 1 week before it goes on the air and we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So I think that was a good training ground for me. And I always, one of the things when I was working at Disney is I was there 15 years. I always was excited about trying to get back here to Boulder, getting back to my Colorado connections.
And did you grow up in Colorado?
I grew up in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. So your interest in CU Boulder was not because you lived here. You just discovered the university. How'd you discover it originally?
I discovered from that pamphlet, and I discovered it after being here for the 4.5 years it took me to graduate.
Okay, so you literally, your exposure to Boulder was CU. All right,
was CU. And then as I went up and did various jobs at Walt Disney, one of the things that I couldn't wait for was finally getting. It was like one of those things where I finally got Denver as a market. And when I got Denver as a market, that's when I kind of lit up and I said, okay, I'm finally back. And then I started doing things for Leeds. I ultimately went on the Leeds Business School board and started getting active. And I realized then how much I loved it here. I just loved it here. And I feel like to your point about the diversity, like you've got tech here and you've got creativity and you've got industry and you've got it with this incredible backdrop. And I just knew that someday, I didn't know when, I would ultimately try to come back. But I decided to leave Disney because at the time, the syndication market, I started seeing that it was going away, meaning that the local TV station things were changing.
And your whole time at Disney was working
in
syndication. You rose up the ranks, but always in the syndication.
Always in the syndication. And cable started becoming big. And I looked at cable and said, I remember there was one moment in time when we were going to sell a movie package, and normally we would go out and sell the local TV stations. And all of a sudden this little cable network called USA Network came in and said, don't bother with those little TV stations. I'll just give you all the money right here. And we did one deal for more money than we would have gotten from the TV stations. And that's when I realized, okay, the market's changing. Because for us, it didn't matter where we sold it. It just mattered who paid the most. So that opened my eyes that I had to get out of syndication. And I made a decision to go to MGM because I could do digital. And it was right at the time when Apple was starting to sell movies. I did.
Before we go to MGM, let's talk a little more about cable TV. And in my book, Bandwidth, and in kind of my journey, it always kind of touched kind of cable TV. There was kind of certainly a separation, but there was also a relationship between the Bell companies trying to get into cable TV and the cable TV industry getting into voice services. There was the history of the cable TV pioneers that I think influenced greatly what we did on the fiber side for telecom. So the developments of cable TV were something that I've encountered throughout my career, and in some ways were inspired by some of their stories. Tell us how cable TV looked from your perspective, where it came from, who the big names were, the Ted Turners, the John Malones, who at first, well, at least in John Malone's case, started as the one owning the cable TV networks, but then worked his way into the content side, Ted Turner used his content to, really take advantage of the proliferation of cable TV. How did all that look from, an insider perspective?
Well, I think the way I would describe it is it looked, what you were able to provide these cable networks, by being able to roll out quicker, faster, high definition, all those types of things enabled us as content owners to really find new windows. So what bandwidth did for all the people that we dealt with, and the way I looked at it, was it allowed us to really realize that our libraries that we were managing at the time, whether I'm at Disney or even MGM, that our libraries could adapt, that we, in some ways we were symbiotic. I mean, I'll use HD as an example.
For the first time, Dan Caruso pulls back the curtain in his book Bandwidth, a memoir that celebrates the pioneers who invented the internet's early backbones, the renegades who lit the fiber revolution, the antics that caused the biggest market crash of all time, and the new wave of entrepreneurs who led the industry back from its ashes. Though it seemed to happen in the blink of an eye, the Bandwidth adventure was a multi-decade roller coaster ride involving larger-than-life successes and devastating failures. The unbridled ambition of newly minted billionaires and high-profile tycoons created extraordinary value, unprecedented value destruction, and endless opportunities for a brave few. This reflects tech's past, present, and future, and is a story you won't soon forget. It will help you prosper during today's AI tech bubble. The book is available at dan-caruso.com/bandwidthbook and released in early 2025.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't get an HD movie through the early days of the bandwidth constraints. You couldn't get one at home. It was too difficult, and so really there was no market for a high definition movie, even though the movies were all shot on film. So the movies had that kind of underlying quality level, but it wasn't being utilized. And so what bandwidth did for us is all of a sudden it opened up and satellite took advantage of it first because they didn't need to worry about the bandwidth or the connections. So I remember one of the first things I did at MGM was we started remastering our movies to make them high definition. And we did a channel. I did a channel for our company called MGM HD. And it was only then that we could get satellite on board. And the way my business worked is the minute satellite did something, guess who came calling? Cable. Mm-hmm. And so cable then was just starting to get the bandwidth from your networks, from your companies to be able to deliver high definition movies through the cable pipes. And then they started doing the same thing. And so all of a sudden, the way I looked at it is the way technology, the way that bandwidth grew, it just opened up opportunities for our film and TV that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, even for those of us who lived in a world where you had a handful of TV stations and that was all your content.
That was it.
You flip channels and, all of a sudden there was a 4-channel Fox and wow, I got a 4th channel now. And then before we knew it, there were 20 channels and 50 channels, 100 channels. And then the ability for content to match up to individuals started to become much greater.
And the quality went up.
And the quality of
So it's why the big screen TVs, if you just look at the 16:9 TVs, it just exploded over that time because you could watch a movie at home in kind of its glory of what it should be. And you didn't have that on a local TV station.
Did you ever watch old hockey clips from before there was HDTV and you couldn't even see the puck move around?
I know, you couldn't see any of it.
I want to see Wayne Gretzky in his prime. And
I know.
You really, even if you watch a video of him, you really can't see it like you could in HDTV world.
And we're getting, technology now. And I think this is one of the things that I think you'll see this at some point, the conversion of that old film or TV that doesn't look great on today's TVs. I think with AI enhancements, as these companies start to figure out ways to do that, I think we're going to have a whole new generation of interesting things to watch where you'll see the puck.
Yeah.
And you'll go back and you'll really look at it and say, wow, I had no idea how good he was until I saw it enhanced in today's, kind of expectations.
Wow, that would be something. And
Yeah.
even Michael Jordan's early years, to see that with the video enhanced into today's quality would be incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So
I hadn't thought
I'm
of
excited about that. I think there's things like that I think will be really interesting, that we'll be able to see. And I ultimately believe, I call that an enhancement strategy. That just didn't exist before. So that's an example of where AI can help us. That, we could remaster a movie if we had film. But if we didn't have the underlying film, and it was an old copy of a film, we kind of had to live with what we had. Now we're going to be able to really enhance that and make it, up at par with what you'd see in an HD environment.
What would be an example of a movie from an era, a bygone era, that you could envision being remastered with AI and brought to life?
Well, most of the movies that we had film on, we've done that already. I would say it's really older television that is exciting for me, because it's stuff that you remember. They didn't do it on film. They did it on kind of digital technology that was kind of dated back then. We just had one. It's become my number one fast channel. So fast channels are basically channels that you do on the internet now, where you can pretty much deliver them through Samsung or Roku. One of my best channels is an old NBC show called Nash Bridges. And that show looked terrible. When I looked at the video, the actual quality of the material, even though it was 5 or 6 seasons, very, very popular at the time.
And when was that?
It was in the
published?
80s. It was in the 80s or early 90s, I think. And then I saw the enhancement technology. And this is even before this is about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. And the technology is improving dramatically. Then I saw the technology that we used to clean it up. It looked amazing. And now it's gone on to become one of my top fast channels.
But you think AI is going to bring that up to a whole nother level?
I do.
You're saying.
I do. And I think that you don't have to wait 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a year and a half, 2, and you'll see better quality. And so we've seen the results by just taking that old TV show and kind of up-resing it to the point where it's HD quality. And you couldn't have done that 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, you just didn't have the technology to do that. Now you do. So, and the quality needs to be at a certain level, because if somebody's sitting there with a Samsung TV and they have 500 channels they can go through, you got to compete.
Mm-hmm.
You got to compete. You got to compete against the other 499. So you really have to be on your A game.
Okay, so MGM.
Yes.
So why did you choose MGM?
I chose MGM because I had to learn other parts of the ecosystem. I had no choice. I knew content would transition, but I had to get my skills to transition. So I needed to learn digital distribution. So I was one of the first people to do a deal with Apple at the time. So I did a deal with a gentleman by the name of Eddie Q, who's still there. And Eddie and I did our first digital deal where I was selling our movies on the Apple platform. It was Fox and MGM. I was always a lean-in person. Eddie was a great partner for us.
So Eddie's a neighbor of mine down in Cabo.
Okay, great.
Both part of El Dorado at Discovery.
Yes.
So I've gotten to know Eddie over the last handful of years.
Mm-hmm.
Our mutual friend Julian.
Yes.
And Eddie and I went golfing at Quencia, where Julian is.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, Eddie's a really interesting, great guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and we started doing this. Actually, one of the most interesting deals I'll never forget, which was really fascinating for me, was Eddie was really doing everything he possibly could to make the Apple iTunes store, where you bought and rented movies, to just get it to launch and really be strong. And he was really out there getting deals with everybody, but he needed HD content. Back to your technology and the bandwidth of it all. Mm-hmm. You had to have HD content. We didn't have that for every one of our movies. And one of the particular franchises that we had at MGM was a small franchise called the James Bond franchise.
Mm.
And that
tiny
little franchise of a few movies here and there. And none of them were remastered into HD. They just weren't. And they weren't also, actually, I shouldn't say that. Some of them were HD, some of them were not.
Do you have a favorite James Bond movie?
Goldfinger.
Goldfinger?
Yeah, that's my favorite. Just because it kind of got me into the love of movies. I remember those early movies as a kid. And so we had a few, the newer movies were in HD, the other ones were not. And I had to get Barbara Broccoli, who is the keeper of James Bond, David Pope, who's a good friend of mine to this day, who is the guy who ran Danjak. And he ultimately, was supportive, but Barbara and Michael Wilson, they all had to agree that we would be selling movies digitally, not on DVD, digitally. And there was a risk of piracy. And Eddie really wanted, and I went to a basketball game with him actually, he really wanted to have the James Bond franchise in HD first. That was his thing. And I wanted to get it. I wanted to get it for him. So I remember making that pitch to Barbara Broccoli and David Pope, where I ultimately took screenshots of all the pirate sites. And I said, look, we don't have to do this deal, but the pirates are out there doing it now. They're taking the films from DVD, high quality, and they're giving it away for free. Let's charge. Let's not let them do it for free. Let's go compete against the pirates. And sure enough, I got them to agree. And we launched with Eddie.
How hard was it to get them to agree?
It was hard. It was hard because
it's an unknown thread.
It was an unknown thread. It took me time. It took a lot of, again.
Genie out of the bottle kind of.
Yeah, it was at a moment in time when they didn't want to be the leader in kind of enhancing piracy. And the one thing that Eddie did a really great job of doing at the time was really showing me the safety protocols that they had put in place. And they're really, up to this day, they're very good about safety and consumer protection and making sure that IP is protected. And so it ultimately worked out for everybody. But it was that moment in time. And that's the kind of experience that I knew I wasn't going to get if I stayed in the syndication business at Disney. I just wasn't going to get that. And then I started to learn international because they gave me Canada. And so I oversaw cable, which was a new thing for me. So I got to work with cable. I got to work with pay cable, which were the HBOs of the world. And I got to work with digital and kind of starting that business and really getting my arms around that. And I started to learn international. So that was the main reason for me.
That's a pretty big gamut of.
But you never knew with the company. So there were a lot of people at Disney at the time who said, really? You want to leave, and my wife included, you want to leave the safety of the Walt Disney Company to go to a company, MGM, that's been sold or rumored to be selling? You might get there and it might be sold right away. And I will never forget, I think I was there 6 months. It was owned by Kirk Kerkorian at the time. And I was up in the executive offices and I looked over and I saw a contingent from the Paramount Company in the lobby. I said hello because I knew one of the people. And I remembered that they wouldn't be there for any other reason but looking to buy the company. So it was one of those where 6 months in, I went home to my wife and I said, Suzanne, I sure hope this doesn't happen. And luckily I had a 10-year run there, so it worked out.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I might mispronounce the name, Kirk Kerkorian, which is, so you must have encountered a lot of the big characters of Hollywood producing. What characters most jump out at you from your journey? And
what characters?
And I'm talking more on the executive front, not people who are in the content.
I really enjoyed my time at Disney and getting exposure to Michael Eisner. And later in my career, I got to go actually distribute content for him. So they had produced a number of different shows, and I picked up some shows from Michael Eisner's standalone company after he left Disney. But he was just absolutely amazing to watch as an executive. I learned so much from him as far as the team he put together. I learned how to do a good team, and I always remember this, and I always say it to everybody. They had a philosophy: A's hire A's, B's hire C's. Hire nothing but A's. Hire the people that want your job. They can't wait for you to leave. That's who you want on your team. And that's my philosophy. I always want to have killers that are working for me that really are excited about being successful, want to grow. They aren't going to be sitting there and just rest on the laurels. They want to know the next chapter. And I think that's done wonders for my career to have an amazing team like that. I learned I'm on a couple of boards. I've been on a lot of boards in my life, and I plan to do that more in the future. I learned something from one of the guys who was a equity investor into MGM at the time we were private equity owned. I learned how to ask the right questions. He probably asked questions. He had larger than life personality, a guy named David Bonderman. I don't know if you ever heard that name. He was at TPG.
Yes, Bonderman. Sure.
Yep.
I had dinner with them once in Aspen.
Yeah. So
yes.
he lived in Aspen.
In fact, it was his. I think it was his restaurant or
David Bonderman and he and David Bonderman and that group introduced me to Harry Sloan, who to this day is one of my close friends, and I learned a ton from him. But Bonderman, what I learned from him was you may only ask 3 questions, but every single one of them are really good. Like they force you to, like when I heard the question come out of his mouth and then land on the executive who had to answer, I was excited to hear the answer.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you knew it was going to be, David didn't know, and it was the one thing that somebody was willing to ask, and then you get an answer that you're like, oh, I was going to answer that, because he just knew exactly what to do. And then Harry Sloan, who was on the board at the time and ultimately became our chairman, he became our CEO at MGM. He was great because he really taught me, and I do this to this day, that when he gave me international distribution, I didn't really have 20 years of international expertise. I just didn't. But he knew, he said, Jim, you know distribution, you'll learn international. Mm-hmm. And he took that chance on me. And that chance really helped me round out my distribution experience. And nowadays, to this day, if I see somebody that I think could be good at running our channels group, and I just recently I've seen a couple of people like that could run another part of my group, and they may not know it exactly, or advertising is becoming a big, big thing in my business now. You don't know it yet, but you'll learn it, and I'll do that. So that's a real management comfort you have to get to. If you find the right people that they can be transferable skills, do it.
Mm-hmm. You have to find the right person who's willing to and able to kind of build into different areas. A lot of people you've encountered in your career, I've encountered mine, that's not what they want. They want to stay in their comfort zone, maybe build some skills, but in a more narrow way. Yeah. I've always enjoyed working with people who can't wait to do the next thing. They want to learn a new area. They want to build a new skill. And over time, they get well-rounded really quick and so much more valuable. Yeah, that's
very much.
When I think back of the people I've most enjoyed working with and collaborating with, nearly all of them have had that appetite, that curiosity to do a lot of different things and learn about a lot of different areas.
Yeah. I tend to gravitate toward that, and I think it makes it a more fulfilling time, especially when you got a lot of change going on.
Yep. Yeah, you're more adaptable to change.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, you're preparing yourself for change. So, exactly. Okay, so continue us forward.
So after MGM, then I went through a weird situation with the DVD market. This was the downside of the business, where you had, and sometimes you learn a lot of things in the downside. As I know you've had a couple ups and downs. I read through some of the ups and downs that you've had, and your business is similar to ours in many ways. MGM had a huge library, and the DVD market at the time was a big, big part of our revenue stream and a big part of our P&L. But that started to wane due to streaming. All of a sudden, streaming started coming on this kind of coming on the scene. And the DVD sales started to downgrade and get to the point where all of a sudden, what was a fairly predictable and consistent revenue stream started to become very unpredictable, to the point where we had a lot of debt at the company. We had to do a forbearance and declare BK. And so we didn't actually go into bankruptcy. We did a forbearance and then ultimately restructured. Anchorage Capital led it and ultimately took over the company. So I had to go through that situation. And, that was not something that I would say to you I loved when I went through it. But when I look back in hindsight, it truly helped me a lot.
Oh, for certain. Yeah.
It really helped me. It helped me understand the downside and how do you deal with, banks that are not unhappy. I remember we did our first presentation to the restructure group where we had to go up on the stage and do a big presentation about what the asset was and all that. And there was, I'll never forget, this was probably because we had a syndicated loan. So there was probably 60 various banks that had syndicated into our loan that in essence had to deal with this problem. And the night before the big restructure meeting, instead of 60 people coming, it was only like 20. And I said, what happened? Because I was learning. They said they all sold out last night. Somebody started aggregating. People don't want to be involved. They don't want to do a restructure. They just want out. They'll take 50 cents on the dollar. So there was like 40 of those cards, name cards of people that were supposed to be there that were just sitting on the table. And I never forgot that. It was like, wow, that business moves quick. When they want out, when it's not good, they get out. So I learned a little bit about that. And ultimately, I think all of us learned a lot about content because that company, after that restructure, went on with Gary Barber as their CEO, and who's an amazing CEO. And they did a great job, and they sold to Amazon for $8.5 billion. So there you go. Content, the thing about content.
The $8.5 billion, where did it start with after the bank?
I think it was at the $2 or $3 billion range.
So in what time frame between those
Probably 6 to 10 years. Probably 10 years.
The thing, I thought you were going with this, and you probably will go down this path too. When you go through a restructuring of a company or an industry, those who've gone through it end up with a mindset, a fortitude that they are able to take with them for the rest of their careers. And when you're building a business, you want risk takers. You want people who are thinking big. You don't want to lose that because you've gone through a restructuring process. Many people do. Many people go through that and they're kind of done. They want to live a much more conservative path. But others see the opportunity like you just described. You picked up the pieces and did something significant with it, and you realize that maybe a lot of those opportunities you could have seen a lot earlier. You could have anticipated them. When I saw what happened after COVID and money started to dry up really quick, everyone would meet with their portfolio companies, and CEOs who've been there were more experienced, or perhaps some of them who maybe didn't experience it, but they had a different ability to adjust quickly. They got ahead of that really quick. But a lot of them wanted to just put that off. We'll be okay. We're fine. Even when there's not a external event, companies who are focused on top line revenue growth or spending the money that they raised real quickly because they're trying to build something that appears to have momentum. Others who've been through these experiences will want to focus on that, but they'll always want to focus on what are we really building here? What is sustainable? Are we really able to generate the type of revenue conversion to something that will be profit someday? Because if we don't, sooner or later, we're going to have to pay a price. And having lived through that, you kind of want to understand that a lot earlier than those who didn't live through that. You can't count on that next fundraise. You can't count on someone buying you out for a really nice price, even if what you built isn't really sustainable. Sometimes it happens, you get lucky, but if you build a real business, if you build real content, if you build real quality, that's going to prevail over time more so than if you just try to take advantage of momentum. So my guess is when you went through that experience, especially seeing the final outcome with the sale of Amazon, it probably changed your whole outlook. Yeah,
I think it really had me focus on one thing. It's the library, it's the library, it's the library, because you can't duplicate it. If you wanted to go make another James Bond, you can try, but you just can't duplicate it. It's the value of a library. And it was the reason I just didn't feel like restarting all again at MGM, because I had a 10-year run there and I was done after 10 years. But I learned the value of the library and what it can do. I mean, it's like water. It can go, films and TV shows will go where the eyeballs are, right? They just find the eyeballs. And the situation for me was great because Lionsgate at the time, I looked at them as kind of an upstart, a really interesting company. I view them as an entrepreneurial major. They weren't really a major at the time, but they were doing some really interesting things. I knew the CEO, John Feldheimer, and I knew Michael Burns, and they were just putting in the structure to kind of, I would say, supercharge that company. And then they brought me in to run global distribution, everything but, at the time, everything but theatrical, and DVD I was handling. And
you didn't want DVD.
I didn't want DVD, and I'm not smart enough for theatrical. So I knew those were the two areas that were fine on their own. And I was really happy with everything else. And it got me, it really was a interesting journey for me. It started, I'll never forget, it started when I made the decision and I left MGM and I took the job at Lionsgate. I had like a week or two. It was over the holidays. And somebody sent me a book and they said, hey, this book is going to be made into a movie by your new company. And as I had already made that decision, I knew where I was going. And the book was Hunger Games. And I remember getting that book and looking to my wife and saying, this book is about kids killing kids. And they're making a movie of it. This is either the best place I've ever gone, is going to be amazing, or I'm in real trouble. And what I ultimately found, and the part of it that I love, is they have a risk-taking culture. The Lionsgate.
Let me pause you for a second there, because a couple minutes ago you said library.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking earlier about the future of John Wick. You're now bringing up the topic of Hunger Games. There's also this value of franchise. So the extension of library is you have the set of characters, this historical following. James Bond, not just what's in the library, but what James Bond franchise will continue to do in the future. Tell us about the importance of franchise.
It can't be understated. I mean, if you just look at our company, the Hunger Games, as an example, did 4 movies. We just did a prequel. New book's coming out, just came out, even better than the last one, so that we're going to have another movie that's coming out with it. The Now You See Me franchise is another franchise that we had 2 years of it, two installments of it. And you got to get the right creative. I think the key is with franchises, and the company really understands it and I think does it really well, is it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Why does it exist? Don't just do a franchise. Don't do a sequel, prequel, whatever, because you can. Do it because you need it, because the fans need it. There's a market for it. There's an interest in it. And I think we've done a good job of that. We've really been able to find these franchises that work and take advantage of them. If you look at John Wick, we even took a TV show. We had an offshoot called The Continental about the hotels in the John Wick movies.
Okay.
Right? And that's it was a 3 long episodes, kind of almost like movies, that we did. And it was a really well done offshoot because everybody was fascinated with the hotel. The Continental Hotel, where you can't, if you go there, you're an assassin, you're not allowed to bring your gun. You can't be killing people in the hotel. There's a decorum to it. There's a whole thing. And so that to me is an example of an extension that is really, really interesting. And we have a number of those going on. So franchises have to be your anchor, and you have to think through ways to keep them fresh. I think one of the things that we're doing really well right now is, if you just look at the way we tease out the whether it's TV or film, you have so many ways to get little nuggets of what's coming out into the ethos. And I think it's fascinating to see, how well you can get fan bases. If you do it the right way and you do it with the right timing, you can get them excited about whatever the next installment is.
And there's multiple ways of delivering on franchises now. In the past, it'd be what's Star Wars, next Star Wars movie, subsequent Star Wars, next Indiana Jones. Now there may be a TV series, and you might take a character or two, and they branch off, and you build something around that. So the way to use a franchise is so multifaceted now, as opposed to in years past. Yeah,
it is multifaceted, and there's just a lot of, as long as the fandom is there, as long as the real desire is there, and there's more tools now than ever to make sure of that, then you can take advantage of it a lot of different ways.
And for a lot of them, you are able to give a rebirth to even the fandom, right? I mean, look at Batman is a perfect example of that. I mean, Batman's been multiple generations of fan base dating back to comic books and the old TV show and then the original Batman movies. And even today, there's people growing up on the next generation of the Batman franchise.
We have one in our library, American Psycho, with Christian Bale. Do you remember that?
Yes,
movie?
yes. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're remaking that.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
That's another one that, sometimes
And
it
is
doesn't even have to be current. It could be something that's had a fandom for many, many years. And then you find the right director who has the right take and you take that chance.
Is it a remake of the movie or is it?
I think I don't think it's a remake of the movie. I
Sequel,
shouldn't even
prequel?
say. I'm not 100% certain what the take is.
Yeah.
I just know the IP really resonates. And I see it sometimes with I manage clips too, which is an interesting thing, which is the clips of all of our movies and TV shows. And so one of the areas that's fascinating for me is I look at the data from YouTube because fans just post things. And then you get to see how many views all these movies or TV shows get.
All right. Well, I have a beef.
Okay. What's your beef?
With the entire industry.
Okay.
When is someone going to do something with Dick Tracy?
I was at Disney when we did. We tried with Warren Beatty. Didn't work.
It didn't work. I love that movie. What didn't work about that movie? That's an awesome movie.
Well, it's just the old little P&L thing. Just the P&L. But other than that, it was great.
Well, don't let that dissuade you. I mean, it still was a really
I went to that premiere down in
movie.
Orlando. It was great.
And there's so many characters now. That Dick Tracy used, I think, every cool character from like all the years of the comic book. So, but man, there's got to be a way to play off of that and do a whole bunch of things with it.
I hear you. I will take it back.
All right,
take it back
good.
to my team. I have an agenda when I go back to Hollywood.
All right. Well, after you work on that one, then let's go to The Natural and see what we could do about a remake of The Natural as well.
You're giving me homework. I love it. I'm glad I have my CU hat on.
Yeah, there you go. But I always wonder why, Dick Tracy wasn't something that you could look at from a lot of different angles with all the great characters and all the storylines. And I thought that was a great movie. I don't know why it cost so much and the revenue wasn't there. I'm sure there's a reason for that isn't because of the franchise itself, but because of whatever happened at the time. But man, I still love seeing clips of that movie.
Great. Good. I was there when it got made.
Oh, very cool. So how much of what you've done over the last, several years is more on the coming up with the creative ideas, what to fund, what to back, what to bring forward as content?
I would say that my role is probably a little less on the film side than the TV side. Smaller films I get involved in. We're always talking about marketability and where there's a market from the distribution perspective. I mean, I sign all the green lights because you have to have you have a number of distribution executives on those green lights because you have to make sure you have the revenue potential to actually make a movie or a TV show. On the TV side, I do it a lot. We're very much active in, Kevin Beggs and I talk about it all the time about what shows we're making, what are the, when something's coming together for a potential green light, do we have a good international market for it? Do we not? Is it going to have a good SVOD market, a subscription video on demand market after the main platform airs it or not? So we have those debates all the time. I love the creative stuff. I actually do documentaries on the side.
Yeah, I want to talk.
to do.
I definitely want to talk about that as well. I know you've shared some of that with me in the past.
Yeah, I do that to keep my creative chops going because it's fun for me. These are more passion projects, although we've made our money back on both the first two, and we have a third one we're working on now. But it's fun to watch the creative process come together. It's messy. I hear about it from our motion picture group, and I hear about it from the TV group. But I'm not the person, actually responsible. When it's your money and it's your film, you're a little more responsible. So it's a little different. And so that's been a learning experience for me.
How do you have time on this side to?
I don't, is the answer. I do not have the time. What I basically do is I come up with the idea. I usually buy a book of some sort, or I'll just come up with the idea, and then I hire a producer. And it's my friend Chris Brown and I who've known each other since we were 8 years old, sharing a treehouse. And he and I do it together. And we're, I'll help out periodically, but I really only help out when it's things like, looking at an edit, and just checking out a cut of the movie to get feedback. But it's all done by other people.
So let's, I want to come back to the specific two that you've produced, and it sounds like there's a third on the way, but let me bring up the topic of Sundance Film Festival.
Okay.
So recent announcement that Sundance is moving from Park City to right in our backyard. Well, not in our backyard, right here in our hometown of Boulder, Colorado.
Front yard and backyard. Exactly.
Front yard and backyard. And when they think about Sundance moving to Boulder, what Sundance really thinks about is Sundance moving to Colorado, because they see Sundance as a year-long set of programming that culminates in the film festival itself, which is centered in Boulder. But there's other activities through the year. Some have already been taking place up in Estes Park. And what they do is they'll bring experienced producers and directors together with aspiring screenwriters, and they collaborate, and experienced people help those who are the up and comers. So different type of, as I understand it, meetups, what we would think of in the tech world as kind of an accelerator or a venture type studio. We talked a little bit with the Sundance organizers, the board chair and the CEO, about creative tech, and maybe we use Sundance coming here as a way to accelerate creative tech. Tell me and tell our audience what Sundance is all about. You've undoubtedly been to Sundance. That's fair to say. So
I have.
Bring us into Sundance. Tell us what Sundance is all about, and then look forward to Sundance being here in Boulder and what you think that means for Boulder and Colorado as a whole, and for CU.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think I can really say how excited I am, because I'm just, having been in the entertainment space my whole career, having decided to move to Boulder many years before Sundance was even an idea here. I knew how much creativity and how amazing this city was, right? And I just saw it through people I knew, the different businesses, being on the Leeds Business School board, seeing all the various types of business leaders that were on that board, and getting to know Colorado business a little bit. And then also understanding the fun of Boulder. Whether it's the parades or the people and the crazy nothing, there's just a lot of fun that goes on here. And when I say fun, I mean creativity. I view it as, I look outside to your garden here, it's kind of like, it's a bunch of bulbs that are here. And now we finally have the right time of year and water, and those bulbs are going to grow.
Yes.
It's going to grow. And I think you're going to see things sprout up from so many different parts of the city, from the state. I think that Sundance made it. I mean, I'm partial, but I think from a rational standpoint, I believe this is the right place for the next 20, 30 years for them. I really believe that, because if you look at Sundance, they want to grow. They want to have the space to grow. And I don't think it's just physical space. I think it's creative space to grow. I think it's both. So this place has it. And you may not see it all yet, but you will. Yeah. I really believe it. And the university, I think, is a great venue for some of the things they're doing. There's a lot of great people there. Ironically, the guy who directed my first documentary works and helps out CU at the films program, Daniel Youngie, and he's won an Academy Award. I just watched the spring game with him. He came to my suite. We had a little spring game here over the weekend on Saturday. And, I just know there's a lot of people that have gone either through the university or, will go through the university, and the creative expertise and kind of appreciation for the creative endeavor will come through.
And so what's it like when you're at the Sundance Film Festival? What's that experience?
Well, for me, it was very business oriented. So I'm not there to have fun. I'm there to work. And so the years that I did do it, I did it for about 10 years straight. For us, it's, it was a situation, maybe not 10 years, probably 5 years I did, 5 or 6 straight. But I did a couple of MGMs, so maybe it was 10. And we have a house. We have what we think are the movies we want to buy, and that's only from their byline. We separate and come up with teams, and we have to separate if there's a screening of one movie that we want at the same time of another movie. 2 different teams go to do that. And we make decisions instantly as to whether we want to be involved in the process. Now, back then, when the Sundance Film Festival was something I was attending, it was active. Movies were selling literally the day or 2 after they screened. And you kind of understood your competition because you could see the agent that's representing the movies there, and you see who else is somebody from Fox there, somebody from Weinstein Company, somebody from this company, that company, whatever company it is. And you kind of got a sense of who might compete for it. And then you have to go in, if it's something you want, and you got to pitch the filmmaker. Why should you, Mr. or Mrs. Filmmaker, go with our distribution organization, our marketing organization, our studio? Why are we going to be the right home for what is an important piece of your work? Right? And we had to convince them. And it wouldn't be just us. There many times 2, 3, 4 other studios bidding on that. So for us, that was the process of being at Sundance. And then we would go to these movies and we judge them. And then there were secondary tiers and third tiers. And those are things that you'd pick up for ancillary distribution. I think one of the first movies which kind of got me, I was always in love with the documentary space, but when I would go to Sundance and watch documentaries, I just loved it. I mean, the reaction to these documentaries was wonderful. The first documentary I bought was a thing called Dinosaur 13. That if you ever get a chance to watch, it's about a dinosaur skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, 13th one found, in the mountains of Utah. And it's a fascinating story, right? And you'd think when you read the byline, you're going to take a nap. It's nap time when you read the byline. But when you go to the movie, and you see it in that environment, you realize this is a wonderful film. And that was the first one that I actually bought. And that's kind of where my love of, and like, kind of want to get more into the documentary space came from. So it's a buyer-seller market. It's a great...
Is it still that today? I think it is. Yeah.
It is. It was not as much this year as maybe in past years, but many, many of the years it's been a buyer-seller market. There's still a lot of things. All the movies will ultimately sell. It's, I think, a little less frenetic now. It doesn't all happen the next day. It may take a month or 2 or a couple of months for these movies to sell. But they all ultimately get distribution and they all go out there. So these movies, when they premiere, it's kind of their coming out party. And then all of a sudden, every single one of them needs a distribution partner. And so that's the plan. But it was a wonderful experience to be up there. Loved it. I think it's going to be an even better experience here.
So our house here that we're sitting in right now is about a mile from Pearl Street, the heart of where Sundance will be. We helped financially support Boulder's bid to win Sundance. We're in active discussions with the powers to be at Sundance. In fact, they're hoping to have an event here soon that is to introduce kind of Sundance to kind of the donor crowd who would care about it while it's here in Colorado. When you think about how we're situated here, what advice would you give to me if we want to lean in and be an active part of the Sundance experience, leveraging this property or otherwise? What point me the right direction?
Well, I think, first of all, when you do that meeting, you and I know the people that live in this town and the interesting people that live in this town.
Yes.
They don't. They know a few, but they don't have the breadth and depth of just our personal connections that we have in town. I think that's one of our strengths is our people. We have a real interesting cross-section of people in the town that make it, I think, really interesting. I think those people need to be there because those are going to be the people that are going to go, oh, I had no idea that, interesting, like they're going to walk away with an understanding of what you and I know. That's number one. Number two, I think that, our facilities here, in Boulder in particular, are really, really great, and helping them navigate where are the right ones to use, I think is part of it, right? I mean, there were certain theaters I would go into when I would go to Sundance where it was a little gymnasium and it was a creaky floor and it was like little stands that were built, and it was kind of not the best experience, really, to be honest. We have so many different ways that I think we can help people do that. There's also a lot of get-togethers that happen at Sundance in and around. And I think that whether it's, you doing something here or other places around town, I think that's going to be really important. I also feel like we need to make sure that the housing is right for them. There's a lot of people who are going to want to come in. Some will stay in hotels, but we don't have that many hotels here. So I think that's going to have to become we're going to have to figure out how we every time I went to Sundance, I never stayed in a hotel. I always stayed in somebody's house.
Yep.
So we need to have houses for everybody, from the lowest to the mid to the high. All that different spectrum is it's going to be important that we make sure that they have that people that want to come and visit, they have a place to stay.
Yeah, because one of the attractions of Boulder is there are so many venues, because the team at Sundance did multiple tours of all the venues, and they were very pleasantly surprised how many venues are available and within walking distance to each other. But people who are going to want to be part of Sundance are going to want to be, if they can, walking distance or pretty close to walking distance to these events, to these venues. So there's a number of hotels here, but a small fraction of what is needed for the amount of people who are going to show up for Sundance.
That's
so
right.
The city and the state are certainly leaning in, and I'm sure they'll relax the Airbnb type rules for
I think they have
period.
Already for festivals. So I think that was one of the things they had to do.
Yes.
And so I think that'll happen. And we have the housing. It's just a question people have to give it up a little bit to make sure it's available. But I think we're going to be in great shape.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, I'm excited too. And I'm excited to work with them on the creative tech side. Our really good friend Julian has a gaming studio in town that produces some of the best mobile games on some of the best platforms. We have Outside Inc., Robin, another, I think, friend of yours as well, joint friend of ours, who has a media platform all around outdoor lifestyle and activities, which is crazy. The CEO of X Games is here in Boulder, Jeremy Bloom. So we have a lot of, as you said, seeds that are already planting that are the cross section between the creative world and the tech world, the media world, that I hope this Sundance accelerates that in a gigantic way.
I believe it will.
Yeah,
for sure.
Good deal. So let's go into your documentaries.
Okay.
Let's talk about the first one, the second one, and the one under the works.
Well, the first one was based on Lego, called Lego the Brickumentary. And it was a film that I knew I wanted to start to get involved with making a documentary, and I got a permission from my company to do it. I had my friend Chris Brown partner with me on it. And the idea came from my son, because he was I would call him a Lego fanatic beyond belief, right? Just crazy. And he was so into it.
What's some of the more elaborate things he did?
Well, I mean, his Death Stars are amazing when he did it. And, my favorite thing is when he would build the Death Star, it would say, ages, he was like 8, and it would say ages 16 and up, and it takes 3 days, and he would be done in like 24 hours. And I go, you've got a problem, JJ, but I love it. I love the problem, but it's great. And he and I, when he was very young, we went to a Lego convention outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We went to a Holiday Inn, and they had a huge little Holiday Inn convention center. I went there thinking it was going to be, Legos for sale. I walked into this convention center. It was all adults. It was adults building Lego. It wasn't kids. It was all adults. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know there was this adult world of Lego. And I was fascinated with it. I took my cell phone out. I started videoing all these various things that I was seeing. JJ was in, heaven. We had a great time. And I went back and I said, I want to talk about this world of Lego. And that was where it was right before the new first Lego movie came out. So our timing was very good. pitched the Lego company to partner on it. They agreed, so they let us, do it. So we shot them over there. Daniel Youngie, who I mentioned, was an amazing director. He took over the reins. And ultimately, we filmed this movie, and it was all about none of the stories of just a kid's toy. It's all the other things it did for autistic kids. It's for art. There's an artist who uses Lego and sells his artwork. And all those stories were there. And then we got Jason Bateman to narrate. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So we took that to the Tribeca Film Festival, sold it to what was an arm of the Weinstein Company, believe it or not, called Radius at the time. And they released it in theaters. It ended up being a great little business deal for us, but it got it out there. And I just love the fact that movie will be here forever. And it still plays. And if you look at it on Rotten Tomatoes, it still has an amazing score. So
nice.
It's really great. So the next one really was inspired because I like to play golf. And I really had a great relationship with my caddy. His name is Mike Pope. We have caddies at my club. Caddies are a big part of the ecosystem. And I read a book by this guy, Ward Clayton, called Men on the Bag. And it was a book about the African-American caddies for the Augusta National Golf Club. A fascinating book about the relationships that were built in Augusta between these caddies and these, what were the titans of our world behind the hedges. And they told stories that were just fascinating to me. And the more I delved into it, the more I realized this is the only sport that allows somebody inside the ropes. No other sport allows somebody inside on the playing field to give advice. Yet they're kind of in the shadows, right? They don't get their due. And so we hired a first-time director, maybe a second-time director, Jason Baffa, and really great eye. He knew how to film it, so they went over to Europe. And we found exactly what I was hoping, like caddies that had done it for 4 generations. The opening to the movie is about a multi-generation caddy who just loves what he does. And so it really was a story about the golf caddy, George Solich, who is I don't know if you know George, but he's a pretty good friend of mine. And he's a big oil and gas executive. And he had the Evans Scholar program. He was very involved with the Evans Scholars.
Okay. Because to my wife, we support Evans Scholars. So I think
so the Evans Scholar program is a big part of the movie. And then the toughest part of the movie was the movie turned out great. Who do you get to narrate? And I decided I wanted to go for the unicorn. The toughest one to get. I said, I got to just try. I went after Bill Murray.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I went after Bill Murray. And
that couldn't be easy.
No, I mean, there's all this lore about how you get Bill Murray. You got to call 1-800-LINE and you leave a message and he might check it. He might not. There's just a lot of lore to it. I just happen to know somebody who was on his business team.
Yeah.
And I went to him and I had some of the movie already done. And so I said, look, I'd like to talk to you about, maybe having Bill narrate this. And I have $25,000. And he looked at me and he said, Jim, do you know Bill's quote? He said, no, but is it 25,000? He said, no, it's not.
Maybe for the introduction.
Yeah, exactly. I said, would you I know he's not going to want to, please. He's been part of Caddyshack. He's part of the caddy lore. His brother was a caddy. He was a caddy. He's the perfect narrator. Please just ask him. Month goes by. I get a phone call from him. Okay, you want the good news or the bad news? Give me the good news. He's interested. What's the bad news? He's interested. And I said, why is that bad news? He says, because I don't know where he's going to be. He's not going to do this. He's not going to put you in front of anything else he's doing. So it's got to be like one of those moments when he feels like he wants to do it.
Yeah.
So I said, great. This is like worth waiting for. So we waited. A month passed. 2 months passed. 3 months. Finally got to 5 months. I'll never forget it.
And at this point, the
movie's
documentary,
done.
It's done at this point.
So it's
waiting
and
for
it's
a
ripe
narrator.
and it's going to become not so ripe. It's going to be not good the longer you go. So it was Memorial Day weekend. I can't remember what year it was, and I'd given up. So I had the producer over on that Friday before Memorial Day, and I said, let's start looking at names. So we got a name, Tom Sally, this name, all these different names. I said, let's start next week. That weekend, I went away with my son. I was on a little trip with him. We were camping. I never forget it. By the campfire Saturday night at like 8 or 9 o'clock, my phone lights up. It's the producer, calls me. And he says, David Brookwell says, Jim, the White Unicorn just called. He wants to do it tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I said, but David, we're in Los Angeles and he lives in Charleston, South Carolina. He goes, I know, we got a problem, but he wants to do it tomorrow. I said, well, can you get a studio? Nothing. He said, I can't get that all done. I got to fly the director. I got to get there. So the next day on Sunday, they try to call the number back. Doesn't answer. Crickets the next day. So I get on the phone with everybody and I say, guys, here's what we're going to do. You're going to fly on Tuesday morning. No, actually, it was Memorial Day. I said, you're going to fly on Monday to Charleston, South Carolina. And you're going to hole up in a hotel. And you're just going to tell him you're there. And we're going to hope he shows. And I remember there was a little bit of whining from one of the people. I'm not going to say who, well, what if he doesn't call? It's a long way to go. And it's my week. I said, this is our only shot. We're on his radar. We got to do it. So they agreed to go. And sure enough, he called. And the next day they went into the soundstage and
where was the soundstage?
In Charleston, South Carolina. The producer figured it out and he went, I didn't go, but they figured it all out. They had a soundstage. And
how much time would it take Bill to narrate a film like that?
If he did it the way you're supposed to do it, which is you read it, there's a certain way to do this. Where I learned how the sausage is made. You're supposed to really narrate to a script. Unfortunately with Bill, he took the script. He said, who wrote this? This is crap. And he started.
Well, this is probably good.
And he rewrote the script. And I could tell my producer was like, we got to open up the movie. Because when you do that, you got to go back and re-edit to his voice. But it was worth it. And he just did such a good job. If you get a chance to watch the movie, it's on Apple. And you'll hear him.
Definitely write that down.
Yeah, it's just a great movie, and he did a great job. And then he said, and this is typical Bill Murray, would you like a tour of Charleston?
Oh, really?
And he had an old
and you weren't there.
I wasn't there. It was the director and the producer, and they drove around in his kind of old convertible, and he gave him a little tour, and then all of a sudden he stopped at some stoplight or something. He said, okay, get out, guys. In the middle of the street. Get out. Thank you. Hope you had a good day. They got out. Off he went. I still to this day don't know whether he's seen the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I still don't know. But he was wonderful and his rep was great. And that was it. Then I took a break over COVID. And then the one I'm working on right now is a book that I bought, which is about the Schwinn Bicycle Company. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing this new one called The Wild Ride of the Schwinn Bike Company.
Yes.
And it's all about kind of the founding of Schwinn, the love for the brand that existed with that brand over the years. But it's a little story of entrepreneurialism. When you get to the third generation, the struggles, a lot of it has to do with globalization, and it ultimately went bankrupt in 92. The brand's still around and owned and managed by Pon, which is a big company out of Europe. Mm-hmm. But it's just it's a business story, but it's not a business story. It's an emotional story. And many people that we've interviewed, the first thing they say to us is, I want to tell you about my first bike. It was a Schwinn. And they tell you the story of getting that bike as a kid. And that's where I really realized the love for the brand still exists. And, one of the characters in the movie that we've made to make it big is the Schwinn Stingray. That bike was the bike that launched Schwinn to be next level.
Oh, yes. I remember
next level. So that was it.
Do you have a narrator in
my family? I have one yet.
I
need one.
I may have one for you.
Okay, good. I need
it's one. Kind of like Bill Murray, though. It's going to be hard to
get him
to say yes, but he's a friend of mine, and maybe he'll.
If somebody,
his name is certainly associated with bikes.
Okay, good. That's perfect. That's what I need. So I'm waiting now. The movie's, I would say, 90% done.
Okay.
So that's going to be, and unfortunately, I don't think I can wait till 27 for the Sundance Film Festival. But I did have a dream, wouldn't it be amazing to have it be premiere, here for Sundance? But I think it's a little too far away.
Okay, so I want to go back to two topics.
Okay.
One is we went from you leaving MGM, joining Lionsgate.
Mm-hmm.
But then we didn't talk about Lionsgate much at all. We went on these other tangents.
Mm-hmm.
Then earlier in the podcast, when we were starting, we talked about kind of the future of the industry of content. We kind of touched on a little bit from a content creator standpoint. We didn't really talk about it as a content consumer, but I want to come back to both those as well, how technology is going to influence the next 5, 6, 7 years of the industry. So first, bring us up to speed on your career at Lionsgate.
Well, yeah. So Lionsgate, as I said, is truly an entrepreneurial major. We have a huge library. We've been buying libraries over the years. So our intellectual property is second to none. It's bigger than the MGM library, and newer than the MGM library, TV and film. And we're just going to be separating from Starz, which is our cable network that we've been part of for a while, but that's going to change within the next month. And we are going to be a pure standalone movie, television kind of creative engine in the marketplace and a major studio. So I think that's going to be for the next 5 to 7 years, whatever period of time I'm there. That's going to be an exciting time. And technology is changing it as we speak. I mean, you just look at Netflix. Look at how they've come on and their earnings came out. I think it was last week. Their earnings came out still strong, unbelievable metrics. And that's how technology and entertainment can really kind of work together. And so I think we, as a company, are very well positioned. We have a great CEO in John Feldheimer. He's been with the company since its founding. Michael Burns, our chairman, same thing. They've been there a long time, so we have stability. And that stability has allowed us to really navigate a lot of ups and downs, but always coming back to good, solid, amazing creative that people want to see, and a library that, if you look at our trailing 12 months, which is really how we kind of look at our library, we've been hitting new milestones every single time we have earnings because the library is very strong. It's just really, really strong. So I run distribution, global distribution. So I handle pretty much where we put things, when, how. It's a puzzle. And the puzzle, if anything, is probably a little more complicated now than it was. But you can do different things now. You can start new businesses with technology that you couldn't have started. We have channels businesses, just a very small business where we take our content, and I call it self-directed licensing, where my team, rather than always being at the whim of a buyer who has to come in and buy content for my team, we can publish and we can actually self-direct where the content goes. So there are certain things like add-on channels, like an Amazon add-on channel. We have a very generic thing called MovieSphere Plus on Amazon, and it's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers. We use AI to help us program it. People love it. It's inexpensive at $4.99, and that entire ecosystem is on the back of Amazon. And so that's an example of a technology change. I couldn't have done that business 10 years ago. I just couldn't have. Now we can do those types of businesses. So I think technology for us and the ability to have our content adapt using technology is what really helps us stand apart.
Great. Awesome. So let's look forward in time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe come back to it from the perspective of those who are producing content, which you just touched on a little bit, but also from the perspective of those who are consuming content. What do you see different 5 years from now than today?
Well, I mean, I do think that AI is going to affect a lot of parts of our business. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on exactly how.
It's a sensitive topic too, right? I mean,
I don't know exactly how, but I'm using it for really, as I mentioned earlier, to really help just be a better group.
Yeah.
The production should be an advantage. It should help. If you had to do 18 models, maybe you do 3 models. When you're doing special effects or stuff like that. I don't know where it will be applied, but if you can help creators ideate and be better creators,
so maybe use the Mr. Beast or how
Mr. Beast.
Tell us about maybe use Mr. Beast as an example of how that originated, how it became one of the most viewed, and now it's moving toward more traditional.
Yeah, I think it used the YouTube, not YouTube TV, but YouTube
itself
platform to become a huge brand. And I read something the other day which shows you that it's not just content. Like he does a huge business with merch.
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff like that you say to yourself, oh, I wouldn't think of YouTube spawning a merch business, but it does. And there's a lot of merch that gets, kind of sold through using these online platforms, all the social platforms, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or Snap, whatever it is, there's tons of commerce going on there. There's tons of eyeballs there. It is now transitioning. YouTube has a lot more long form now. So many of my movies and TV shows are actually through either their platform or other ways. We're on YouTube as a platform. So I kind of feel like, I'm excited about doing more with those platforms and figuring out, when I talk about our content will find eyeballs, we need to do that.
Yep.
We need to find those
even X is having long form now embedded in there.
Yep. And I've had discussions with them about trying to supercharge it. And if you look at any of the technology changes, IP content has been at the forefront of driving those changes, right? I mean, if you think about Netflix, they were a DVD business delivering DVDs. And I'll never forget, it was not a great time when they ran around Hollywood and said, hey, you got any old content that we can buy? We want to start a streaming service. We'll just buy what you can't sell. So most of the distribution executives around town, that's a meeting they'll take when somebody wants to come in and license things that they're not selling very well. So that was the beginning. Using library content was the beginning of that transformation. And we were actually there for one of the first originals because we're very forward thinking with our television production group. And we did Orange is the New Black, which is one of their first two originals that they did. So technology needs content and content needs technology. It's really a very symbiotic relationship. And we're really going to, I think over the next couple of years, I think we need to do even more of that.
Yeah. And out of the podcast world as well, the top podcasts are starting to develop these, and they're starting to develop these characters, these influencers that are starting to become bigger than life themselves. I mean, they certainly had a major influence on the recent presidential elections, but I can imagine coming out of those characters, there's opportunities to take that from podcasts to other forms of ways of building upon their followings.
Well, I mean, just look at how video of podcasts 6 years ago wasn't happening. Look at it today. It's a huge business. It's a big, big business. I mean, the amount of video podcasts, not just the audio, but the video podcasts that are now being uploaded to YouTube is staggering. And so that to me is technology just filling a need. People want to watch it sometimes. They want to listen to it sometimes. YouTube gives them those options. And I even think Spotify is going to, if not doing it now, they will be doing it because I think it's where the place is going, where the market's going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, one of the reasons I love doing these podcasts is I get to know people that I know, but not at the same level of depth. By doing it in this format, we were able to go deeper. We're able to stay on the topic of not just the individual and who they are, but what their life experiences are, what insights they have. And this has certainly been that for me. So, Jim, it's been great getting to know you so much better through this.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Nothing but success.
All right, man.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All righty.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.